This is a tutorial video showing the very basic workflow of creating UV maps for ZBrush using Blender, so you can actually use bitmap files to texture your models. So the first thing is to create a cylinder, make Polymesh 3D. We need to add some geometry to the top and bottom. So insert some edges, some concentric circles to the top and bottom. I also want to show how creases react to switching between programs. So crease the edges. And there we have a nice clean cylinder. Export to an OBJ file. And then next, we'll go into Blender. A to select everything, delete, File, Import, Wavefront OBJ. Under Import OBJ, keep vertex orders and check poly groups. Alright. Find your model and import. Select. Hit 5 on the numpad to turn off perspective so you can just see an ortho view. Then tab to enter edit mode. Select to edge select. Hit A twice real quick to deselect everything while holding down Alt. Left click to select that entire edge. You want to do the same on the bottom, so you want to hold Shift and Alt, left click, and you've selected the top and the bottom rings. Then under UV, mark seam, and hit A twice quickly to deselect everything. Now this will separate the top and the bottom from the barrel of the cylinder. Next you'll want to split this line in two, so select one end, hold down Control, and then select the bottom, and it'll select that entire line. Then again, UV, mark seam, deselect. This is a very simple, very simple model. The simplest thing to unwrap, next to a cube, I suppose. Now we're ready to go into UV editing. So UV editing, again over here, 5 to go into ortho. Hit period on the numpad to zoom to it, deselect. Right, select, and go into UV and unwrap. So there you have it. There's your caps, top and bottom, and the barrel. All unwrapped, nice and clean. No jagged edges. You're going to want to take these and you hit L, hovering over each of them to select them. Shift L to deselect. So L, L, and then G, and you can move them. G, and if you hit, say Y, it'll constrain it to just up and down. G, and then X, side to side. Select everything, then you're going to want to hit S, which is scale, then X, which means it's only going to scale on the X axis, and then -1, and this flips it. And for some reason ZBrush and Blender don't quite see things the same, so you have to flip the mesh so if you do any writing it's not reversed. Alright, now you have your clean mesh. Go to UV, export the UV layout, figure out where you're going to put it, and then for this I'm going to do 2048 by 2048, fill opacity of 1. Now you can make it any size you want, but keep them square. Both of these should be the same value, and for ease of computing, the renderers find it easy to use standard sizes: 1024, 2048, 4096, 8192. Right. Then you export. Next is to save out the file. Export, wavefront OBJ, over into the export options, selection only, turn off materials, turn on polygroups. And then just save it over the old file. Alright, back to ZBrush. With that subtool active, you're going to go to Import, and you're going to import that OBJ. Now this will replace the file, it won't append it. And you'll notice that your creases are gone. Creases don't survive the process. It's not standard, so you just have to reestablish them. Next you go to UV map and make sure that the size of the texture map is set to 2048 or whatever size you actually used. Then you go down to texture map, create, new from polypaint. Now there's a representation of what your image file looks like. You're going to clone the texture, and you're going to go over here to the texture, click export. I usually like to append UV so I know what the texture is all about. And off to Photoshop. First you wanted to open up that PNG file of the mesh. This is kind of your guide to how the topology lays out in your texture file. And of course, once again, ZBrush and Blender don't see eye to eye, so you have to take this and image rotation, flip canvas vertically, and just save it and close it. Now you want to open up the actual PSD file, make it a layer, set its blend mode to darken. You're going to add a layer, bring it to the bottom, and here you're going to want to make a neutral gray, which is a B value of 50, HS is 0, or RGB is all 1/28. OK, and fill the layer. Next is to import your guide mesh. So place embedded. There's your mesh. You're going to want to change the blend mode to multiply. And save the file. Right, this is the base setup for your mesh. You've got your guides, and you can get to work. Add a layer. Now anything that is greater than 50 is going to extrude from the texture, or from the model. So, see if this works right. And of course, anything that's lower is going to push in. And then you can get your middle values. It's just for a test. Okay, so now you've got some painted detail on there. you're going to want to disable that mesh, save it, go back into ZBrush, go down to Displacement Map, and import your UV. There you can see what you've done. In order to get that to work, you're going to have to give a starting value for your intensity slider. I usually like to start out at 0.125. And there we go. Now we can kind of see, turn off frames, that the A is pushing out, these are all pushing out, and the B is carved in. Now this texture isn't actually on your model yet, it's just a projection, it's just an image wrapped and it's being processed by the program. Now when it comes time to actually project that onto your model, you're going to want to subdivide it to give it detail. Notice all the scalloping. I'll get to that in a minute. Usually I like to start at around 5 and apply displacement and see if that's deep enough. If it's not, just go back and change your intensity and reapply it. And if you've got the intensity you like, then you work on the resolution. This is very jagged, which might be fine for a very small model, but if it's larger, you might want more resolution. So you undo that, add another subdivision label, subdivide it again, apply it. Much nicer, much cleaner. Still a little ragged on the edges. This is why I don't like this spiral type modeling or topology. So undo it, add another one. Okay, that's about as good as it's going to get. And that's basically the workflow. Now about the scalloping. This is why I don't like using the primitives for models. Because these rings, which are normally quite round, you'll notice they start, the closer you get to that termination point, the more they start to scallop. And it's very hard to predict when you're in Photoshop how your image is going to turn out. So let me show you an alternate. Okay, this in my opinion is much better geometry. Everything's squares, quads, and it's more or less even. When I subdivide, there's very little movement of those lines. Some can't be helped. Not perfect, but much better. Alright, so let's go through the process again. We've got our mesh. Export. Go into Blender. Import. Edit mode. Mark the seams. And unwrap. Flip it. All the settings are the same still. So export. And export. Settings are all the same. Back to ZBrush, import. Reestablish my crease edges. If you map, that's set properly. Texture map. Move from polypaint, clone, and export. Back to Photoshop. Open up the reference mesh, image rotation, flip canvas vertically, and save. Oops, wrong one. Blend mode to darken. Add your base layer. 50% gray. We want to embed the mesh. Set it to multiply. Now I add a layer. Turn off your reference, save, and back to ZBrush. Displacement map, import, set your intensity. There you go. Now see the difference when I subdivide. Very little movement. Start at 5 subdivisions and apply it. Way too jagged. Go to 6. Looking much better. This is probably good enough for most uses. But we'll do one more just in case. And there. Nice clean geometry. Alright. Let's go over a few things in Photoshop on how to best leverage this base mesh. Now this, of course, when it's subdivided becomes circular. Or these will be arcs instead of straight lines, but computers really don't see curves, they just see a bunch of connected straight lines. So if you want it to be curved, you got to follow the straight lines. So you want to make the edge of this cap stick it out more. So you'll just follow these intersections all the way around. The outside's all masked, so its shape doesn't matter that much. And fill it in. Now over here we notice that the B is on the bottom. Luckily I chose the right one, so that comes to the bottom of the numbers. So we know if I want it to wrap around, I'm going to have to continue that detail here. Now say we wanted to do the opposite on top. And this is a difficult thing to deal with. This is going to cut in, and this is going to create some what is known as non-manifold geometry. And that's just a computer science way of saying, or I guess an engineering way of saying, cannot exist in reality. I'll show you why that is. Right. Turn off a reference and save. Back to ZBrush. Import again, and you'll see how they look. All right, going to apply it. Now notice when we come out on the edge that it never quite gets sharp. This is just how it gets interpreted. But you notice on the top where it plunges it in, double, you'll see it gives it these two weird edges. And these is actually showing the inside of the model being pushed outside. This will be a problem when it comes to 3D printing, so you'll have to deal with that. And one of the best ways I've found to deal with it is imagine that you're all done, you're ready to convert this out to an STL. So the first thing you want to do is you want to decimate it. That's what, 655,000 polys. Let's see what 5% looks like. Very little movement there, but it's down to 65,000. Now you can play around with this to dial in exactly what you need. It gets a little bit rough. Let's go to 2%. That's good enough. Down to 26,000. So now you have this simplified model that's going to be very difficult to edit. And you can see how that might be confusing to a computer. What's the front? What's the back? Your inside is spilled out. Alright, this you're going to use the smooth, turn Sculptress on, and just sculpt it away. Try not to get too carried away, like that. Not too horrible. And then you can export, and chances are this will be fine. Alright, that is the basic workflow that I use to texture models when it comes to repeatable patterns like chainmail and designy scroll work, things that are much easier for me to do in Photoshop rather than sculpt directly on the model. There is a companion document to this that goes over every step along the way in excruciating detail. So I hope you find that useful.